How we going? Well, we're back again. It's a lovely Sunday morning. The sun's out, which is nice because there's been a shitload of rain and everything's really wet. But I've been mucking about a little bit, finishing off the Lego mould things that we did earlier, and also finishing off the third brand Elechem test for the pour with the plywood. It sanded up okay, behaved much the same as the other two brands, Oakfield and Lucy Clear. I do note that whilst its bubble release was pretty good, and I'm going to talk about textured surfaces a little bit more later when I sort of do my overview on the moulds, but most of the air that is visible in this particular piece is around the edges. The biscuit tin that I used as a mould had a sort of a slightly textured surface, and it seems to have held air around the edge. There's a little bit in the middle, and I believe that what's in the middle has come from the way the epoxy percolates or moves, and what that's done is drawn some of that air that's contacted or stuck to the surface of the mould, and then as the epoxy has sort of moved, it's drawn it into the middle. Otherwise, pretty happy with its performance. Very low bubble count on the inside. Sanded up nice, polished up pretty well. I don't know how well you can see that, but if we have a look sort of here, where I have done the actual polish, it has come up pretty good. Same as the other two, it's a pretty quick and dirty job. I haven't gone out of my way to make this pristine. This is more about a fair comparison. So I believe what I've done here is more or less the same as what I've done on the other two. Otherwise, nothing really extra to report here. It's done what it should. Bubbles minimal. And as per the other two brands, I'm going to chuck it in my book press, and we'll see what happens when we put a bit of pressure on it and see what the join does. So we'll go and do that now. Right, so we'll chuck this in much the same as we did for the others. Line it up on there like that. Slide this in carefully. Give yourself a bit more room. And then we have it, pretty much what I would have expected. Right, so no real surprises there. What I would say is no definitive advantage with using a different product for sealing the edge. The other two were sealed with themselves, whereas this was sealed with a slightly faster setting product from the same brand. It has, you can see here it's torn a little bit of the timber, but even down to this sort of flared edge, the results here are pretty much identical to what we got from the previous ones. And if you remember from my other videos, both of them did exactly that. So from a strength point of view, all three perform exactly the same in the circumstances. It might be me, maybe I required a small amount of extra pressure on this one. It's possible there's a small advantage because of the curve, but the reality is I really doubt that there is any major difference from a bond strength to timber point of view across all three brands. And I don't think there's any benefit from using a different type of epoxy to seal the edge. It's simply you seal the edge to avoid bubbles, and there is a big advantage when you are doing transparent or properly clear epoxy pours to minimise or remove all bubbles. Sealing the edge is essential. but there is a compromise in strength. And that can be sort of evidenced here when we look at how this one broke, and you can see here it's torn the timber pretty much right across the edge of the join here. The timber has broken, the epoxy join has not. This was a pour without a sealed edge. So, before I move on to a few other things, I will note, in my previous videos I've talked about a brand called Clearpox. I noted that they had left the market. Apparently that was, they're a Queensland-based company, and the floods had kind of destroyed their warehouse and manufacturing, and which is a pretty good reason for not being here. They are now back. They're a product I quite like, particularly when I was using them before, when they were here in the market. They offered excellent value because they were around the $20 a litre mark. Product sets pretty quick, not really suitable for deep pours, but an excellent product for having a bit of a go on very small volumes and up to about 10 or 12 mils thick. I will note that now that they are back, they are more expensive and the value proposition is not there in my opinion. However, I mention them because they're here, and they are still a good product, particularly if you want something that'll set in a few hours rather than a few weeks. And that can be quite an advantage, particularly if you're doing very small pours, particularly if you're coming back to fill in small cracks or gaps or whatnot in a larger pour, you know, in the process of machining or sanding when these gaps and holes become apparent. Not having to wait weeks to get back onto the job is an advantage. A product that I will probably invest a small amount in to have as a backup for those exact reasons. I mentioned earlier about moulds. One of the things that's become quite apparent across the tests that I've been doing here is the surface of the mould has a big impact on the amount of bubbles, and also the amount of work involved in polishing and finishing the item. And a good example of that is this. So this silicone mould, it's quite a smooth surface. These are not very expensive, particularly when they're this small. And the finish here has not been touched. It is pretty clear. Up close, there's a bubble or two, there's some smear marks, and certainly some effort in polishing would make this look a lot better, but it's very close to finished straight out of the mould. And then I take a look at what happened with our Lego moulds in the chip tins, which is an excellent way to make something round, and it's fast. But the textured surface on the inside meant this had to be machined, and it had to be sanded and polished. And there was a lot of work in making these three items come up to a point where they were acceptable. Have I finished them great? No. There's a lot of time involved in that. But these are pretty good. Certainly good enough for the purposes of making a comparison with the way they behave during the process, and you know, we'll come back to that in a little bit more depth. But regarding moulds, smooth finish makes life easier, particularly with bubbles. If you're doing a large pour for a river table or something like that, and you're looking for practically zero bubbles, a high gloss, super smooth tape will make a big difference to the amount of air that is held on the mould surface. And we saw with the Elechem test in the biscuit tin, a slightly textured surface, most of the air was on that surface. A lot of the air that was apparent had stuck to the sides. Now, we come back to my original comments earlier, this video about how epoxy percolates and moves. So it moves around in the tin, draws that little bit of air that's captured to the side and brings it into the central components or central area of the epoxy. and that obviously leaves air in the middle that's visible. With a project like these small things, and that's a lot of fun, something to do with your kids, it doesn't cost a lot of money. Big thing to do here, dip or coat the item first. I'm just going to bring this up close. This is a particularly good example. And we'll have a look here, and you can see, hopefully you can see, there's air trapped under the hat, and inside all sorts of little pockets that typify Lego as a thing. Now, that could have been prevented by chucking on some gloves, getting a brush, dipping this into the pre-mixed epoxy and poking around and getting the air off. Could have also been significantly minimised by using a vacuum chamber. I didn't use a vacuum chamber because the whole point of these videos is to emulate what most people are going to be trying to do at home, having a bit of a crack, testing stuff in the shed. They don't want to go out and spend a heap of money on equipment until they figure out whether they like what they're doing, and so on. A vacuum chamber would make a big difference, but pre-coating complicated items with multiple surfaces like this would also make a big difference. As far as the sanding and the polishing that I've done here, I've been pretty clear. I'm not doing this to perfection. Sanding, particularly when you've got clear items where there's no tint, there's no hiding anything. The sanding for a process, or the sanding process for a piece like this, is time consuming. There's no way around it, particularly to maintain this curved edge and not get a faceted finish. This had to be done by hand. I did cheat a little bit and use my lathe, a thing that you guys are not necessarily going to have at home, but there's a lot of time involved in this. What I would say is wet and dry paper, you can get it at Bunnings, you can get it at any of your local hardware stores, your Supercheap Auto, all of that. That's what you use here. I went up to 3000 grit on these, and then good old silver. Pick it up at Woolies, I reckon. This is what I used to polish it for the final bit, and again chose this product because it's easy to get, small investment, and most likely to probably be in your house already. So if you're going to have a bit of a fuck about in the shed, one less thing to buy. Probably required a little bit more effort to make these pristine, but they are good, they are clear, and indicative of what a little bit of time can get results wise. Right, so conclusion. Over the last couple months, done a few different tests. Those of you who have followed me will know that we've gone through the whole process of making a mould, mixing stuff together, temperature control, the whole process of putting epoxy and timber together, with the view of testing 3 brands to see how they behave. My opinion about the 3 brands is they all offer pretty good value for money. They all offer a set of results that reflect what they cost, but there are a couple standouts for individual aspects or individual properties that I would mention. Firstly, from a VOCs or odour point of view, the Lucy Clear is a standout. It's the only one you can sort of stick your face in and not smell anything. If you've got a sensitive nose, it's the one to go for. It's Australian made. The team at Boatcraft, where it is manufactured, are very knowledgeable, and I've always had good interactions with them and good customer service. Good product for a sensitive nose and pretty consistent results, and very good value. From a hardness point of view or a strength point of view, it's a little bit tough to call. I don't think there's any significant difference. What I would note is the Lucy Clear Plot product was a bit harder to get a finish on, so it required a little bit more effort, and I believe that is because it is a slightly harder product, and therefore potentially more robust long term. Oakfield Clear, I use a fair bit of it, and if you follow me on Instagram, you'll note that I'm often tagging that product, and it's because it's great value. From a bubbles point of view, perhaps not, but it is strong, it pigments up nice, it sets and behaves predictably, and most of the client-based jobs that I do are a solid pigment, and so any issues with bubbles are, well, they're not an issue. I think that the Elechem product is probably the better of the three, and that would be a reasonable thing to expect given that it is the most expensive of the three. Minimal bubbles, nice to work with, does have a small amount of notable odour but not enough to be offensive. Strength wise, it is there or thereabouts the same, potentially a bit better, but not enough to be sort of definitive on. But when it comes down to bubbles, it will behave the best of the three. So from here, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. I will be doing some other things. I think maybe I've got a little bit more to give the world in the way of content. What I will do sometime in the near future is work out how to auction these three Lego statuettes, or whatever you want to call them, off for charity. There's three items. I have three charities that are reasonably close to me, or to my heart, I suppose. BCNA, Beyond Blue, and the Black Dog Institute. Once I figure out how it's going to work, basically we'll auction them off. All of the proceeds will go to the charity nominated for each individual item. I personally will cover postage costs to anyone in Australia, and from there, hopefully we'll be able to make a little bit of a donation to those three charities. I'm just not sure how that will work. That is on my list of things to figure out. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for the little bit of feedback I've been getting, and do chuck me a like or a subscribe or something, and we'll be back soon having a look at something different, I hope, and also with a way of auctioning off these little Lego things. Meantime, have a great day, and take care of yourself.